Morning! Today I am going to go over my September TBR. So it is morning for me, probably not when you're watching this. This is definitely going to go live in the evening as usual. But I have my trusty cup of coffee with me, so I thought let's just go over the books that I plan to read. These are not all of them. The September TBR, as any TBR, is overly ambitious. Like any TBR, not all of these books are gonna get read. Like any TBR, probably I'm gonna read something that's not on this TBR as well. So this is an intention, and there are definitely, from this tag, I'm actually hoping to finish all of them, but from the ones that are like not physically here, we will see what ends up happening. But so, the first and highest priority for me in the month of September is to read books that I set out to read for the Booker Prize. So the Booker Prize longlist was announced on the 1st of August, I believe. I had hoped to already read some of these books during the month of August. It did not happen. I have 5 books off of the Booker longlist physically. Those are 5 of the 6 that I decided that I want to read. The 6th book, I'm not sure whether I'm going to prioritize it because of how ambitious my September TBR is and the fact that I do want to read some other stuff outside of the Booker Prize. So we'll see how the Booker Prize project goes along. But so these 5 are priorities for me for the month of August. So let's get September. It's September. Let's get started on this TBR. So I'm gonna probably start out with the one book that I am actually currently already reading, the one that I started my month with, and that is In Ascension by Martin McInnes. So this is a book that is classified as sci-fi. I haven't fully got into like the sci-fi elements of it yet, but it is definitely already kind of eerie. So in this book we are following a woman who was born in Rotterdam, had a very complex childhood. There are sort of like mentions of child abuse coming from her father, mentioned throughout this book. It's never really specified yet, but perhaps we will be going into that a little bit more later on within the book. Now she kind of follows in the footsteps of her father to some extent, becoming somebody who is specialized in marine biology, I believe. Not exactly that, but like something to do with ocean life, and so a biologist specializing in, I believe it was algae. And one day NASA announces that they've made a huge improvement in their space travel program, and this has apparently a huge impact on the world's scientific community. And so in relationship to this discovery, there is a lot of underwater research that's taking place, which I don't know whether that is truthful. It could definitely be the case that apparently NASA does a lot of underwater experimentation to kind of develop technology that they will then later use in space. And so they find this sort of like trench that is much deeper than the Mariana Trench. So it's a trench that's like 36 kilometers deep or something like that. And so in the part of the book where I am now, which is very early in the book still, they are going there to kind of research that. And so it's been called sci-fi, saying that you kind of do in deep water what we would explore in space. And so I'm eager to see what we're going to uncover there, whether there's going to be some sort of like alien life. As I said, like in my video specifically about the Booker Prize that will be coming at some point as well. If you've seen the deep sea episode of Planet Earth, then it does not surprise you at all that there's some weird shit down there. Next up on the Booker long list is Western Lane by Chetna Muru. All I really remember about this book is that this has to do with squash, not a vegetable, but the sport. I don't know anything more about it. It is very, very short, so I think I was kind of intrigued with the idea of like a sports novel making it onto the long list, so that's why it's like on here. But I haven't really explored much about it, and I've forgotten anything else I read about it. So that's gonna be the case for a lot of these. I won't really have many active memories of what these books were about, unfortunately. So that is definitely the case for the next one. And I remember this one being kind of the one that I'm most tentative about of the books that I had an interest in, and that is Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. And yeah, this back also doesn't give me any sort of a clue anymore. So, because I really don't remember anything about this one, I will actually just like read out part of it, I guess. A young woman moves from the place of her birth to the remote northern country of her forebears to be housekeeper to her brother, whose wife has recently left him. Soon after her arrival, a series of inexplicable events occurs. Collective bovine hysteria, the demise of a ewe and her nearly born lamb, a local dog's phantom pregnancy, a potato blight. She notices that the local suspicion about incomers in general seems to be directed with some intensity at her, and she senses a mounting threat that lies just beyond the garden gate. And as she feels the hostility growing, pressing at the edges of her brother's property, she fears that, should the rumblings in the town gather themselves into a more defined shape, who knew what might happen, what one might be capable of doing. So, does not tell you much except that it is sort of like that us versus them, native population versus like incoming population type of deal, which does interest me. But yeah, as this is the most vaguest premise, I guess that this is why I have most trepidation going into it. And I don't know, something about the cover also just like screams like high literary fiction, and then might have like a sort of writing style that doesn't fully work for me. So actually for next year's Booker Prize I should actually do the thing where you like read a chapter from all of them to kind of determine whether I want to read, which ones I want to read, because now I just went into them and maybe some of these will have a writing style that doesn't work for me. Then we have The House of Doors by Tan Thuong Anh. This is an author that has written 3 books, and all 3 of them have been longlisted at least for the Booker Prize. I do have another book of this author, The Garden of Evening Mists, I think it's called. I think this is their first work, and that has been on my Kindle for probably over 10 years, and I've never read it. And like I have never heard, like I'd never really heard a lot of buzz around this author until the lead up to this Booker Prize, because apparently they haven't really published anything in the last 10 years or something like that. So there was nothing really pushing me to prioritize that book. I'm going to prioritize The House of Doors now, but if I love this one, finally The Garden of Evening Mists might actually get some priority on my TBR. But so this book, all I really remember about it takes place in Malaysia, I believe, and we are looking at like a troublesome time there and like expats that are living there, I believe. Yeah, I'm mainly just really curious. Oh yeah, and it was also to do with the author Willie Somerset Maugham, so W.S. Maugham. I've never read any of their work. I don't even really know whether they're like poets or like whether it's like a poet or a fiction author. But I do like the sort of like intersection of talking about authors within fictional works, so perhaps that will work out for me. I'm just very curious to try out this author now that I've heard that they've like basically have a total success rate when it comes to the Booker Prize, or the nominations for the Booker Prize at least. Next up we have one that I'm most excited about almost. Like I'm most excited about in Ascension, which I'm currently reading, but this is definitely one that when I read the premise for this one was also one that I was like, okay, this is definitely one that could really work for me, and this is This Other Eden by Paul Harding. So this takes place in a sort of like island community. It's like a sort of like community that moves out to this island near the coast of the US, I believe, where they kind of set up their own society that has like that is filled with like-minded people who are trying to get away from regular society and its rules and constrictions, and I'm assuming that there's gonna be some stuff that goes wrong with that concept. So it gave me major like The Beach vibes, which I really like that movie a whole ton. So that will be the literary fiction side of my September TBR. Moving on to the fantasy side. So the final sort of like physical book that I have to show for that would be The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the 4th book in the second era of Mistborn. Second era Mistborn doesn't really work all that well for me. First era Mistborn is one of my favorite fantasy series, but second era just is much more like mystery, detective type plots. It's also much more modern society, which will be interesting to check out when we finally get to like Mistborn Era 3, which will be an even more modern setting. Whether like that will also mean that I still enjoy it less, or whether it's just this specific sort of like pre-industrial timeline that doesn't really work for me. But so in this one we are following a detective duo called wax and wane, and typically there's like a case that they have to tackle in every single one of these books. It's much more light. It's definitely got like, what the most interesting thing about it is like kind of seeing that world that you're used to from Mistborn Era 1 kind of evolve in Mistborn Era 2, because this takes place some 200 years after Mistborn Era 1, and so the people and the events from Mistborn Era 1 are kind of like legend at this point in time, though we do have some overlaps on certain characters that will be popping up in here. But also the magic system has definitely evolved. As this is pre-industrial era or industrial era, I'm not entirely sure, we do have like trains coming into the scene. We have gunpowder, so we have guns, and so this has a very interesting impact, of course, on a magic system that is built around metals. So I do enjoy that aspect of it, but you know, the detective style plot is not really up to what I enjoy in a book. I will say that like the third book, the previous book in the series, was my favorite one so far, and did give me that sort of Mistborn Era 1 feeling in parts. I have forgotten everything that takes place in these books, but I am just gonna go into book number 4 hoping that there's enough there to kind of make me remember what happened in the previous books, or that I can just go into this one without really having that background knowledge, because I don't really feel like rereading Mistborn Era 2, I have to say. But so this is currently the oldest book on my physical TBR. I bought this one in November 2022, so I do still have some margin of error when it comes to reading this one. According to my rules, I should be reading it before November 2023, but so I wouldn't mind getting a little bit of a head start for it. I have a few books that I bought in December, so it would be nice to get this November one out of the way and then like tackle the December ones a little bit more spread out. Then a book that should already be physically here, but I've been having a lot of issues acquiring it, or acquiring it in the edition that I want, because I have the US editions for this series, or I had the US edition for the first book, so I had to get the US edition for book 2 and 3 because of the size difference. And so the second one was supposed to be here like 2 weeks ago or so, then it got like postponed, and then they were like, yeah, actually we cannot get a hold of it. So I reordered it from another place, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to get it from there, but that would be The Liar's Knot by M.A. Carrick. So M.A. Carrick is an author's duo. The main like well-known author of the two would be Mary Brennan, who is the author of A Natural History of Dragons, which is also a series that I still need to continue because I've only read book 1. But so The Mask of Mirrors, I really enjoyed a whole lot. It is a Venetian-inspired fantasy series in which we're looking at a girl called Ren, or a woman called Ren, who is basically a con artist who has been away from her hometown for a while, but is now returning in order to kind of try and con herself into a noble family and steal their money. However, complications arise, family dynamics become complicated and convoluted, and there might be some sort of like dream magic also involved within this one. I really enjoyed this one a whole lot. There is a sort of like Zorro type character as well within this series, and it's very fun to kind of try and figure out who it is. I think I knew who it was, like I had my suspicion on the right character from the beginning, but then I was like led to contemplate whether my intuition was correct a few times at least throughout the book, so it wasn't that obvious that I didn't doubt my original suspicions. And yeah, I just really fell in love with this world, these characters. There's a sort of like tarot game in this one that's very interesting, and I actually also participated to the Kickstarter to get the actual physical version of that tarot deck, and I will link that down below in case anybody's interested in that Kickstarter. Now, so I want to read The Liar's Knot. I don't know when it's going to be here. Normally I was supposed to read it in August and then read The Labyrinth's Heart, the third and final book that just came out in August, in September, but I don't know whether that's going to happen. Probably not. Probably safest to say not. Another one that is probably my most anticipated release for the year, or one of my 2 most anticipated releases for the year, is He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker Chan. This is the sequel to She Who Became the Sun. She Who Became the Sun was probably my favorite fantasy of the year in which it came out, which will have been 2021 because there was 1 year in between there. I really enjoyed this one a whole ton. It's marketed as kind of like being a Mulan story because of that gender swap and because of the fact that it is Chinese inspired fantasy, but I must say that I don't really think it has so much in common with Mulan. Of course, there is like the fight against the Mongol army, which is also the case in Mulan, I guess. So there are definitely elements to it, but it's a very different type of story in my opinion. So we have this girl who grows up in a very poor family, and her father takes her and her brother to a fortune teller. Now the fortune teller predicts like huge things for her brother. However, for her, the fortune teller says, I see nothing in your future. However, shortly after this, bandits attack them, and her father and her brother actually end up passing away in this attack. And so she takes on the name of her brother, Zhu Chongba, in order to steal his fate. And then she moves over to this monastery where she grows up, and later on this monastery also gets implicated within a war that is taking place between the Mongol overrulers and the sort of like rebels within the the original Chinese population. This is also a sapphic book, and the main interest and the main thing that I loved about this book is that Zhu Chongbai is a character who is born as a girl and then goes through life pretending to be a boy. And while it's not necessarily spoken of as being, for example, trans rep or non-binary rep, it definitely talks a lot about the binary and about the fact that Zhu Chongbai is a character who does not fit in either one of these categories, is a character who kind of navigates these binaries because that is what society imposes upon her. However, she doesn't really feel like she's either or. She doesn't feel like you can put her in that tight of a box. And I really enjoyed that exploration within this fantasy setting. Aside from that, we also are looking at another character who also has these sort of same conflicts with the binary. He is a guy who has been made a eunuch at one point in time, and he struggles with the perception that people have of him and his masculinity and the way that they question his masculinity because of what was done to him as a young boy. So I really enjoyed those elements a whole ton, very eager to see where this book is going to go in book 2. I am prepared for apparently some heartbreak, so this one is definitely high on my radar. I do have an arc for it as well, but I am maybe going to wait until my Illumicrate version for it arrives. I should check on the status, but like I had to confirm my address 2 weeks ago, I feel like, or somewhere last week maybe. So I'm hoping that this is shipping soon, and so I can kind of read it physically rather than just read it on the Kindle. And for you around the world, another reason to prioritize it in September would also be the fact that it is the book club book for Of Queens, Witches and Valkyrie, the book club hosted by Sarah from Voyage Through Words. Another book club book would be The Bone Shard Emperor. So this is another one that actually should be prioritized, but as we can tell, so far everything is a priority on this immense TBR. So The Bone Shard Emperor is the sequel to The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. So this was a very interesting book actually as well. So this is also Asian fantasy taking place in a sort of like island empire, and we are following the daughter of the emperor amongst other characters. So the main two characters that we're following is the daughter of the emperor, and then we're also following a smuggler. We're following a third character as well, but that sort of like point of view didn't interest me as much, and as a consequence I also don't remember too much about the point of view, to be fair. But so this daughter of the emperor basically is kind of in competition with this sort of like adoptive son to kind of please their father, and their father will kind of give them keys to unlock certain rooms based on how much sort of like mastery they show over bone shard magic. Now the magic system here is very interesting and has some very dark implications because, as I just mentioned, it's bone shard magic, meaning that they use bones in order to create these sort of like creatures that then do their bidding. However, you need bones for that, and the bones are basically harvested from young children. Everybody in the Empire who becomes 13, I believe the age is, but I could be wrong, could be even younger, basically gives up a bone behind their ear in order for the Emperor and his children to use that to bring to life these creatures. And the magic that is taken through that bone also implicates the energy that that person, the living person that that bone comes from, has remaining to them. So it has some dark implications about empire and power. And so as a consequence, it's also a little bit difficult to root for our main character because she is using these bone shards. She has definitely some more qualms about using it than her father does, for example, but she does end up using these. So it does create this dynamic where you're rooting for a certain character, but you're also really understanding of the sort of like darker implications of their actions. The smuggler, and then the other character that we're following, the smuggler type of character, he basically at the beginning of the book escapes from this sort of drowning island, and he picks up an unlikely passenger. So this has an animal companion. There's much more to the animal than what meets the eye originally, and I have my speculation about what the animal actually is and their origin story, which were not which wasn't like explained yet within book 1, so I'm hoping that book 2 is going to give some more information about that. And by the end of the year I should also be finishing book 3 in the series, so this is a series that hopefully I will be finishing in 2023. So fingers crossed on that, because I need to finish some series from time to time. So those are the main priorities, I think. I don't think that I have another book that is as priority as those, but those are already a ton of books. Now, another book that ideally I should finish, which is like the last thing that I officially put on this TBR, is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, also by Brandon Sanderson. So Brandon Sanderson, as you may well be aware of, this year came out with 4 extra books, which is like in the 4 books that he wrote extra during the pandemic, and every 3 months one of these is released. I took place in the Kickstarter to get the ebooks for this, meaning that I feel like I should be getting around to them before the next book drops. So the next book drops on the 1st of October, so ideally I get to this book. These books, this was kind of sold as like secret project, and so the idea would be that like every detail about these books would be kept secret in advance. There were some videos explaining the basic premise and stuff like that in case you were interested, but I have decided not to know anything about these books. So I do know the titles, and I accidentally just set the title, I guess, whereas I'm supposed to keep these titles a secret. But so, like, yeah, I do hope to get around to this book, but yeah, there is just so much on this TBR that I'm really not that sure that I'm gonna have the time for it. And so, as I indicated, I know nothing about it. I think it is Cosmere, this book, and it has a gorgeous cover, but that's really all I know about it. And then let me just give some honorable mentions, I guess, to some books that would be nice to read. The first of which would be The Battle Drum. The Battle Drum is my other most anticipated book. I was hoping to have it on like one of the I was hoping to have it be the book club book of Queens, Witches and Valkyries to make me prioritize it. I didn't end up winning, so now I have to read it in my own time, and I'm like, when do I read this book? Because last few months have just not been ideal for that, with my own readathon and then Magical Readathon. So it would be perfect to get to it in September, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Another example would also be like, I would love to get to the next book in the Kushiel's Legacy series. I would love to get to the second book in the Imriel trilogy, Kushiel's Justice, I believe it's called. But I do have 2 months for it, so I have September, October to read it. So if this goes into October, that's perfectly fine. I prefer to have it done in the first month, but I think I'll probably just be reading it in the second month. And then The Last Argument of Kings, the 3rd book in the First Law trilogy, is definitely overdue. I was supposed to read it in June, so yeah, that didn't end up happening, and I don't know when I'm ever gonna read it. But so yeah, I think that is more than enough books to talk about for the month of September. Let's get cracking and let's get started on reading some of these. But so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what you will be tackling in the month of September and what you think definitely deserves a priority for my September TBR. And I hope to see you guys for the next video. Bye!